that have followed, there have been, it's incredible, more than, Marilyn, do you know? I think we're over 70,000 at this point, and 70 countries around the world have held death cafes. So John, of course, held his first in the basement of his home in London in, I believe it was September of 2011. He was inspired by the work of a Swiss sociologist named Bernard Cretaz, who held events in cafes in France, where you have a little coffee or tea, some cake or cookies, and talk about whatever is on your hearts and minds about mortality issues. So this is the story that we tell at the start of every Death Cafe about how that got started. And the ground rules, which are basically everybody is welcome to share whatever they are thinking or feeling without fear of judgment or reprisals. It's a safe space to talk about a sensitive topic. And the point is to be led by the participants in the conversation. However, as a Death Cafe hostess, facilitator, whatever you want to call us, it's important to let the conversation flow. If people have questions, we can answer them, but we are to avoid leading people to any particular course of action or purchase decision or belief. And of course we have food. Now, I have been doing my death cafes in a retirement community that somebody who lives there has been very helpful and supportive of the Death Cafe movement. So he's been actually providing the coffee and the tea and the cookies, and I bring gluten-free and sugar-free alternatives. But 2 months ago, I went online because we could not meet at that they're a place where a lot of old people live, and our governor basically shut down any visits to assisted living places or any of the nursing homes and whatnot. So I do have a Zoom account, and I pivoted and basically said, okay, we're going to hold the Death Cafe online. And the first one, we had 18 people participating, and it worked really well. What I like to do is ask everybody if we were sitting in a circle together, I would ask them to go around the circle and say their name and what brings them to the Death Cafe. And that exercise by itself is a wonderful way to start the conversation, because you get an idea where people are coming from, what they might be interested in. If they have a really fascinating story to tell, some of the people who have come have had near-death experiences, and I always want to hear what that was like. But again, it is to be led by the attendees. So if the conversation pauses or drags, it's okay to ask a question of one of the participants, harking back to that introductory period. What else can I tell you? I've heard some amazing stories, and I do find here in Albuquerque, at least, that there is a lot of interest in green burial. There is a green burial ground south of Albuquerque. It's about an hour's drive out of Albuquerque. But a lot of people want to know about their options for greening their final arrangements. So I'm always happy to talk that up and provide tips for that.
Great. Well, thanks, Gail.
Yeah.
Marilyn, I'd love to get your perspective in here. You have been able to sustain your Death Cafe monthly for a number of years. I don't want to insult you by actually sort of misjudging it. And so we'd love to hear what your experience is like, and also perhaps in addition to Gail's comments, perhaps share with the group groups that you tend to partner with that actually perhaps allow your reach to be able to expand.
Okay, Gail did a great job of explaining the general concept of Death Cafe, and I just want to point people to deathcafe.com, the website, where if you're thinking that you might want to host a Death Cafe, start one or whatever, you can learn all about it there. There's a guidelines that you download that you then read through and agree to follow, and they're very simple. She outlined them, that you don't promote any one, ideology, that they're always free and accessible alongside good food and drink, and that the conversation is led by the participants. So I did learn about it in the spring of 2012 and talked to John Underwood and started the Ann Arbor Death Cafe in November of 2012. And we've been meeting monthly since then. And sometimes people ask me why I think it's been so successful. And I really think that the model works because it's strangers getting together to talk and share, that they can come to the Death Cafe and then they can leave the Death Cafe and they don't ever have to come back. It's not like they're meeting with neighbors or people that are in their same communities or co-workers or anything like that, so they can say whatever they want or not say, contribute as much or as little as they want and then go on their merry way. And one of the biggest comments that people make is that it makes them feel more vital, more alive. It makes them appreciate living more. So I think that's why it's been so successful. And I think that why the Ann Arbor one has been so, we have over 500 people on the mailing list, is that I early on started collecting email addresses and evaluation forms, and we took people's comments seriously and tried to improve how we did things. And then I send out a monthly reminder, but I never misused that. I never, spam people or, give anybody else that mailing list. And I have a helper who, I can't always be there every single month. So there's one other woman who we're the co-facilitators, and then between us we have a lot of contacts. So we got it initially I was able to get it going because I had a lot of contacts, and then it just really built from there, from the attendees. So I would say each time we host it, at the beginning, the first year we had 8 to 12 people each time. And after that, it pretty rapidly grew, especially when I got more savvy about using Facebook. And we're in a university community here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So a lot of students started coming. And so we've gotten a lot more diversity lately. And so our biggest one was like 46 people. We meet in a community room of a bookstore. And we regularly have, now there's a few more death cafes in the Detroit area. So we don't have quite that many, which is actually kind of good. It was hard to have that many people. But we always, so now we usually get 25 to 35 people at the most, generally around 28, 30. And so that makes it really manageable. I don't bring food, and nobody brings food, because we meet in a bookstore that has a tea room, so people have to purchase their own. So I might be breaking the rules a little bit there, but there is good food and drink. So nowhere does it say that I have to bake, because if I had to bake, it would not happen. So they could purchase their own, and that nobody complains about that. So other than that, it's free. So the one thing that I do sometimes do is let people know of other death positive related events that are happening when I send out that once a month reminder. So I do feel like that's okay to do, to just let people know, hey, there's this Day of the Dead celebration going on, or there's this parade going on, or there's this, Dying Well festival, or this, what's the name of the one you do? Your festival, Gail, is
Before I die.
Yeah, Before I Die. There's been several of those. So anything like that, or if there's and then sometimes I actually try to send out a follow-up email after Death Cafe if people, they ask for like, can you remind me of those resources that were mentioned or whatever? So I, all the books and movies that were mentioned that day, I follow up with them or whatever. So I think that's okay to do, but I handle those questions really carefully because people do because I'm known in the community as being somebody, like I was on the board of directors of the Green Burial Council for a few years, about 5-6 years ago. I was on the board of directors of the National Home Funeral Alliance, and I'm kind of known. I do a lot of education about home funeral and green burial. I'm also an end-of-life doula educator and trainer, and I'm an end-of-life doula myself. I do advanced care planning. So people do sometimes come and think, oh, Mary Lynn's going to talk. Like I'm coming because I want to learn about, home funeral or green burial, or I want to learn about what end-of-life doulas are or whatever. And so I make it clear right from the very beginning that that's not going to happen, and that they can talk to me afterwards or take me aside or whatever. Here's my email address or whatever. And then I'll answer questions if they come up, but I really quickly direct it back to the people and what everybody else wants to talk about. So that's pretty important. So I'm not sure what you meant by other groups, Darrell.
So my first Death Cafe was going to be held at a local library. And so just kind of, giving people ideas around spaces that have a natural constituency and that might be looking for adult and senior programming where they can say, hey, I've got this idea, and just kind of asking the question, in the event that someone doesn't have a set roster of folks that they can reach out to, how do you partner with an organization that would be sort of open to these sorts of discussions?
I think it's really good to make connections in your community with other people, other people who are into the death positive movement or death awareness or
Compassionate Justice, Funeral Consumer Alliance chapters.
Maybe even hospices or hospitals or social workers or therapists that have a following, or senior centers or any other group that has like a lunch and learn kind of thing, or a mailing list or whatever. Ask them to hang up a flyer, to put out a notice in their newsletter. If you hold it at a library, a lot of times libraries have a lot of people that receive their newsletter. So give yourself plenty of time to plan. Like I would say, if you're thinking you want to start a death cafe, give yourself at least 3 months, and it might even be better to have closer to 6 months to plan, to carefully choose your very neutral location. I think it's tricky to host it in a funeral home, a cemetery, or a congregation, a place of worship, because some people wouldn't feel comfortable coming there. So it's really great the more neutral the place can be, like a community center or something like that. We're lucky that we have still have bookstores in Ann Arbor.
Well, I've held them in an actual bakery cafe, in a couple of bakery cafe places, with the idea that people have to buy from them in exchange for them letting us use their space. I've actually held it in my own living room a number of times until we got this set up in the 5th floor lobby sitting area at this place. And now we're going online. So with a free Zoom account, you can have up to 40 minutes, which is unfortunate because most death cafes run anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours. And then one other issue that I wanted to bring up was about getting the word out. I do have a background in public relations, so you want to know about listing the event. You can start a meetup group for free. I have the Albuquerque Death Cafe meetup. It's grown to the point where I have to pay, I think it's $180 every year to use that service, but it's a great way to get the word out with each event, and it handles the emails to the people who have joined the group. Also, you mentioned Facebook. That's a great way to get the word out. But also you have local calendars that you can list. The Next Door app has a calendar of events, and if you're a member of that, you can list events and include the Death Cafe. If your weekly newspaper, your regular newspaper probably has an online calendar that you can list the event there, as well as the deathcafe.com website where you would list each of those and people could find them as well. So that's a great way to get the word out.
Great,
It's
thanks.
super important actually to, oh, sorry, Darrell.
So just while we've got, I want to be sensitive to Gail's time. We're going to lose it in a few minutes. Harold, I'm gonna unmute you. Would you like to pose your question?
Oh, okay. Well, my question was, what kind of background or training might be needed for someone who's going to host a death cafe? In my own area, there was a death cafe hosted by a hospice nurse who was a real professional at listening skills and facilitating and all that. And then she moved away from the area, and so we don't have a death cafe anymore. So I was looking at, well, what would it take to get it going? I talked to a couple of people. I said, well, I wouldn't lead it, but I'd like to, go. So I just like an idea of, does it, I don't think it requires anything, but would it be improved by someone with some skills in the topic, or is it something that simply would require somebody who's a good facilitator?
So Harold, I saw your question. That's why my hand's going up. I'm Sarah Williams in North Carolina, and I just got sick and tired of waiting for somebody to start a death cafe. I knew about this movement, had read about it, went to deathcafe.com. There's a beautiful introduction to how what you can do for your first meeting and la, la, la. So I said, I think I can do this. I mean, I have this interest in death and dying and just put the word out. And this happened in July of 2014. We're almost 6 years into this death cafe. And if you have an interest and you can just read a little bit and get the word out and don't, go down into a grief support group. I mean, there's always going to be somebody who shows up that had an Aunt Bessie that she's still not gotten over 10 years ago. And it can just spiral everybody the wrong direction. But yeah, I think you can do it. And we're now at our, I think, third location. We meet in this fabulous Mexican restaurant. They give us the back room. It's huge, and there's sugar skulls and calavera murals all over the wall, and it just couldn't be a more perfect location, which we're missing now because of the pandemic.
No. So right, you don't have to be a professional in the death business to host a death cafe. Just an ability to converse with people and allow for give and take and for a flow of conversation. One of the issues that I actually ran into with my last death cafe was somebody new joined, and she dominated the conversation, and people jumped off the call at about 1 hour, and it was because of this woman. And sometimes you have to learn how to redirect people who are trying to take over the conversation. So in that regard, having those kind of interpersonal skills as a facilitator would be helpful.
And what I would add to that is I simply started going to death cafes in the area to participate, but also to observe. And actually, the first one I went to was one of Gail's down in New Mexico for those same reasons, thinking about bringing them back to Chicago. And what I have found in my experience, and so I reached out to the Death Cafe facilitator here in Chicago and said, hey, would you mind if you and I co-hosted one? So I could kind of learn how to host and to Gail's point, learn how to manage those conversations very delicately. And she was completely open to it. I think my experience has been is that most folks who are involved in this are very generous with their time and their expertise. And it was a situation where I sort of ran the logistics and she still ran the meeting. But yeah, it worked out well. And after about 2 meetings, I felt confident enough to be able to handle most of what we were going to see. And so the other way is just to go and observe, and if you find someone that you think you can work with, just to be able to sort of ask them to do that.
It might be helpful having that situation where you say you don't know people, because I belong to another group where we have regular Zoom meetings. There's one person that totally dominates, and if you try to cut him off, he's like, I'm talking now, but you know him, he's a friend, so you're like, okay, so you can't do anything about it. But
Harold, you're going to have to learn how to open a can of whoop ass.
And if you're the moderator on a Zoom meeting, you can always mute them.
Just hit me.
I have a really good.
And I got some real pushback saying we would consider that an insult if you muted anybody, not just me. So it was like, whoa,
It gets tricky. I have a really good suggestion about that I learned from a professional facilitator. And she said, and I learned this the hard way too, after the very first Death Cafe I had, where one woman dominated, and no matter what body language I tried to use or placing myself in between her and the rest of the people or anything, she did not get the message. She felt like she had to personally respond after everybody spoke. So she was speaking exactly half the time. And there was 8 or 12 of us there. So I just was like, I went to my friend and I said, I got to quick learn some facilitator skills. And she said, you start out saying, the ground rules, basically we listen more than we talk, and, we keep things confidential, and we don't tell each other what to think or believe, and, those things. And then I'm very comfortable saying is, and if you're like me and you like to talk a lot, sometimes we need a reminder. And so I will do that. If somebody's, forgetting and talking too much, I will jump in and I will say, let's give somebody else a chance. And that sets the stage for me. So then it's not as bad as if I have to do that without having said that. I've laid the groundwork for doing that. And then somebody could go, oh yeah, you're right, or whatever. Instead of, it's not so much like calling them out. You've already said you're going to do that. And I say, okay, hold on just a sec, let's let somebody else, and then it's okay, and then it's more okay. It's not always okay, sometimes people do get upset, but I think that you're exactly right, Gail. People will leave if it's not moderated well. And so I think a modicum of facilitator skills and comfort doing that is important. And the other thing that I do is I identify other leaders in the group who can help me if I'm needing to process something afterwards at the end of a session. And, did you pick up on this, or did I handle this okay? Or what do you think about, this, how could we do better, or whatever? And, just keep communicating with each other and helping each other so that you're not having to feel like the whole onus is on you, or you have helpers. And that has been useful when I've had somebody who I was concerned about that came, a young person who I thought might be suicidal that came or whatever. I was able to say and it doesn't happen very much. In fact, we hardly ever even get somebody who's really ill. Occasionally people have identified that they have 4th stage cancer, or they're not expected to live much longer or whatever, but it's usually not that. That's not usually our audience. But I asked one other person who was there, who was a regular, who was also, I think, had a healthcare background or chaplain or something. I said, if this person, I'm worried about this person, if they leave early, would you please follow them out and ask them if they're okay? And I always have resources available that I can give people for a hotline number, or if you need more help, or, counselors or something like that. So if somebody does seem like they need that, I can check in with them afterwards and give them resources. That's a really good thing to have available.
Jillian.
But the first one is, we have 2 programs that we run here in Indiana, in Evansville, and one is the Death Cafe, and the other is called Death and Donuts. And I started the Death and Donuts program because the Death Cafe limited us as far as handouts that we could supply for people coming in. or people there to answer questions. So they both seem to be running really well right now. One of the things, and I wanted to say something to Sabrina Young down here. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, yourself, you're so young, but you have this young woman with you, this little young lady with you that I'm thrilled. We have tried so hard to get young people to these meetings, and what we get are people my age. So I don't know what possessed you to join this program, but I love seeing your young faces in there. So how do you get more young people at your meetings? And the second thing that I wanted to ask is the restriction on handouts. I have a lot of handouts. We found that we were having so many questions on things like anatomical donations, hospice. What does hospice mean? What is palliative care? Organ donation. I just made up a bunch of different handouts that we could give to people who were interested in those things. We lay them out, and if they want to take them, they can. And that's one of the reasons that I went with the Death and Donuts format as opposed to the Death Cafe. Right now, we're doing one every other month. We do the Death and Donuts one month, Death Cafe the next month. This month is our Death Cafe month. So those are my two questions.
Well, Jillian, I was going to ask if you, as the host, what I do after every Death Cafe is like a key point summary. So the things we've talked about that have links to articles, news stories, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
All of this gets sent out. Sometimes we pass things around. There's an article from the New York Times or, pictures that people want to see. But I think people really find that helpful just to do a little summary of the main things we talked about. Good Lord, you can't capture it all, but.
I agree, we do that, but sometimes, especially anatomical donations keep coming to my mind because there are so many restrictions. A lot of people think all you have to do is decide, I want to donate my body to science when I die. And it's not simple.
By the way, I get a lot of people actually calling me for body pickup. And it's like, I don't know how you got my number, but I don't do that. I do have to get off the call right now, but I want to thank you for your interest and support of the Death Cafe movement. And I did want to put in a plug for my YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and look for my name, Gail Rubin, I've started doing a weekly coronavirus cinema collection, which are movies that can help you get the conversation going about funerals and planning. My first one was funny funeral films. Last week I did Based on a True Story, which are true story Get Low, Bernie, and Grand Theft Parsons. And this week I'm doing The Viking Funeral on Film. So hope you'll look for that and maybe sign up for the channel.
Okay, Gail, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you taking the time. We really enjoyed it. It's good to see you again. I wanted to, Marilyn, I wanted to ask another question. You brought up the issue of managing sort of group size, where you've had a relatively small group size, but then you've had as many as sort of 40 people. Can you maybe sort of share with us how you sort of manage small groups and relatively large groups differently, if at all?
Yeah. When we first started hosting the Death Cafe, and I say we because I do have a co-facilitator, Diana Kramer, and that was essential. We always met all together around a library table sized table, a big table. So 8 or 12 or even 15 could meet around that one table. But when we got bigger than that, we started meeting. When people first showed up, we would put them in groups of 4 around different tables or in different clusters of chairs. So that, and that way, that solves 2 problems. some people are more comfortable talking in small groups, and you can do a little bit more deeper sharing that way, and you have a little bit more time to talk if you want to. So people seem to enjoy those smaller groups discussions. And then also, if people trickle in late, you can go ahead and you can stagger when the groups start. So as soon as a group of 4 forms, I give them the basic, instructions, which is, okay, we start by going around and introducing ourselves. We say our name and where we're from and why we came today if we want to. And during that time, there's no crosstalk. Each person gets the floor. And then after everybody's gone around, we open it up for discussion. You can follow up on what somebody said or start a new thread. And I give those 3 guidelines that I gave before about being inclusive and confidential and not telling people what to think and listening more than you talk. And then I say, and then halfway through, I'm going to give you a 5-minute warning, and then we'll come back together as a large group. We'll share out from the different individual groups, and then we'll carry on the conversation. So that I just say that little bit and I get a group going. Plus I have a handout for each table that explains, gives the deathcafe.com website and explains what Death Cafe is and says a little bit more about those things I just said. So they can get started on their own. I try to place an experienced person in each group. And with the newcomers, that helps the newcomers feel a little bit more comfortable. And then I go on and start the next group. And so I just stagger how they all start. And that way, if I have 2 or 3 people showing up 10 minutes or even 20 minutes late, they're stuck with me. That's the last group that forms. And I don't have to interrupt any of those groups. They can go, the other groups have already gotten started, that doesn't penalize the people that showed up on time. So that's the format that I use. And then that helps us really handle the large crowds. Sometimes people will drop off after that small group sharing, and whether they didn't know it was going to be that long, or they just don't have time, or they lose interest, or I don't know, whatever. It's a normal time to be able to leave if they didn't want to stay for the whole 2 hours. So the largest groups we've had, we ended up having to have people sit on the floor. So the people that were more able to do so sat on the floor, and they actually loved it. I mean, it was a really nice feel. Those were some of the best conversations because it was like a party almost, and people just really, I don't know, that's I hadn't thought about this before, why it really worked with the large group, but because we had that small group sharing and then the large group, and people actually, one time I forgot to do the sharing out from the small groups with the large group, and people are like, wait a minute, we want to know what everybody else was talking about. So they really do want to hear from all of the groups what the subjects were, and they really enjoyed that sharing out time. So that's
one of the, Mary Lynn, I think that's one of the disadvantages of breaking out into small groups. I've resisted that. I guess because I just want to know what everybody is thinking, saying, sharing, and I kind of think they do too. I mean, you got to rein them in sometimes, but I just love the gestalt of the group.
Let me pose this question to the group. As a rule, does anybody generally set a limit on the number of participants in a death cafe? People shaking their head no. Okay.
I've never had to do that. I mean, I suppose if it grew too large, where we couldn't even fit people safely on the floor, we would have to do that. I probably at that point would just go spill over into the restaurant next door and say, okay, 10 of you have to go, and just do your own and send a couple of experienced people with that group. And I wanted to mention that we've started doing virtual in the last 2 months as well. And I've talked to a few people that had just gotten a death cafe going in the last year or so, and then they went virtual and it didn't transition very well. They just didn't get enough people. But because we've been doing it for so long, we have such a large mailing list. We have 500 people on the mailing list. The last 2 that we've done virtually, we've had 16 to 20 people. So that gives you an idea of the, I would say there's some people that come once a year or once every, 2 years. And there's some people that come nearly every single time. In every death cafe, there's more than half the people that are there for the first time. And we may never see them again, but that's okay. I mean, and a lot of times people come from out of town, or family members bring a visiting guest or something like that, you have to, I really highly recommend everybody register on deathcafe.com, because people can find you that way. That's one way to get the word out. And that's how they keep count of how many death cafes there's been. And so I just looked at the start of this meeting, there's been over 10,000 death cafes all around the world in 71 countries, as Gail mentioned. And that they know that because you list them there.
And do you know a thing that's happening from this virtual meeting? These virtual meetings, I'm getting people from California, Virginia. They're signed up to come to my death cafe in a couple of weeks. I guess they go to deathcafe.com and they go, that looks cool. And so they've reached out to me. So it could be like a rumpus room in a couple of weeks. I don't know what's going to happen.
The one thing I do is I don't publicly give the link on
Me
Facebook.
either.
They have to message me, and I send them the link via email or private message.
So talking about technology, and what's interesting is I don't know if, and I'll send a link to this article, but there's an article in The Guardian about a few weeks ago that talked about this very issue. Number one, about the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused just a surge in demand in death cafes. And Sarah, the point was made that people from all over the world are sort of converging on any death cafe that just might work in their schedule. Most people clearly use Zoom. There's been some news about Zoom issues lately. Has anyone ever done a virtual death cafe using any other technology platforms?
I mean, I love Zoom because you can do breakout rooms. So I can put people in small group discussions through Zoom, but I haven't used anything else.
Anyone else familiar with it, with any other technology platforms?
There are other platforms like freeconferencecall.com I've used for years for audio conferencing. It works great. And I understand that they have video option now, and for multiple people involved. And I think some of us used to use Skype, but they became expensive and you couldn't do it with multiple people, or more than 3 people at a time or something. So it was difficult to use. It got taken over and kind of ruined it.
Great. Thanks, Harold.
I think GoToMeeting is another one that might work, but I don't know. I'm not very familiar with GoToMeeting.
I do want to respond to a question that was raised earlier, but I think we've addressed it. Is a library a good place to host it because there's no food available? The woman that I worked with here in Chicago always hosted her death cafes at a library, and she had permission to bring, and she would bring in a water heater. And she'd bring in sort of tea bags, and she would actually sort of make a lot of cupcakes. So you're right, there might not be food available there, but if it's a community room, typically they will allow you to sort of carry in stuff, and then afterwards carry it out with you in the trash as well. One of the things that I think
we had our meetings at a library.
Okay, great.
Donuts meetings were at a library, and they had no problem with us bringing big urns of coffee in and the donuts. So
great. And the other reason, Julian, I'd be curious for your experiences. When you use a library, do you put together a reading list of books that folks can take out that either talk about end of life or Green Barrel or anything like that? Has anyone done that?
I do. I have a pretty long suggested reading list, and we have people that bring books, their favorite books in, so we can talk about those. We do those at the Death and Donuts programs, though, because I didn't think I was allowed to do those kinds of things at the death cafes.
Early on, when we were celebrating our 2nd anniversary, I checked in with John about what we could do for that, and we had the idea that we wanted people to do a certain thing to prepare, like talk about what music they wanted at their funeral or something simple like that. And it was kind of like, no, you really can't do that, because if somebody comes and they didn't prepare, then they might not feel included, or there's not supposed to be any agenda, any homework, anything like that. That's more like death, dying, and dessert or something like that, where you actually prepare.
One of the nice things about the reading list at the library, I actually talked to some people at the library prior to one of our Death and Donuts programs, and they were able to order a few books in of a book that we were going to talk about that night. And so they had books there available for people to either buy or rent out,
Oh, wow.
which was nice. That was kind of handy.
Oh, that's great.
I will say that I have done, I think I mentioned death cafes when I've been asked to at a conference, at a social work department, and at a community center, and I did not think that they worked as well. And I wondered if other people had had that experience also.
What was I'm sorry, Mary Lynn, you used?
I have been asked to do a death cafe at a congregation, at a social work department, in a hospital, among the staff, at a conference. There was a gamers and hackers conference that I was asked to do a death cafe at. And I didn't think they worked as well. There just wasn't the same kind of sharing that you get when you have a pure death cafe, just freestanding.
Because there's food, maybe.
No, I think it's really because of this, the when people come to a death, now I'm answering my own question. Sorry, I'm just jumping in. See, I do talk too much. I really hold back at Death Cafe. I do not talk very much at all. But I think it was because there's, when you come to a death cafe, you come just for that. And there's no other, you're not afraid that you're going to have to see that person after lunch, or later in the day, or that somebody's going to follow up with something you said. Or I could not get the social workers to talk about themselves personally. They talked about other people. They're such care providers that they wouldn't share personal experiences. And I kept asking them open-ended questions to try to, get them to really experience Death Cafe for their own sake. But they remained in their clinical brains. They were at work when they were doing it. And I just think it's too big of a stretch for people.
We actually did have a hospice, our newest hospice facility, call and ask us if we would hold one of our Death and Donuts programs at their hospice, and then gave a tour of the facility afterwards, which we had a lot of the people who came to the Death and Donuts actually went on the tour. It was really nice. It was a beautiful facility. So
I think it can certainly work to do a presentation of some kind or whatever, but I don't know about a pure death cafe.
Jillian, I know you said our newest hospice facility. I heard nudist. Girl.
well, one of those might work too. You never know.
That reminds me, the funniest joke that ever came out of Death Cafe was, people can get punchy sometimes, and they were talking about, people often ask, can you just wander into the woods when it's your time to go and just, be alone and secluded and lie down and, die or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, in a lot of cultures, that's what people do, but I don't recommend it. It's going to be really hard for the survivors, to get a death certificate and then to do all the paperwork and, whatever. There could be lots of legal ramifications, and I could see how that would be really attractive or whatever. So we kind of went off on that tangent, and we decided that somebody ought to create a walk-in cemetery where you walk in when it's your time, and you just set up camp, and there's other people that are there, and it got really silly. It's like you wake up one morning and you're making your breakfast and you say to your neighbor, you still here? You haven't croaked yet, and it just went on from there. It was hilarious.
Oh my God.
So this has been a great talk. We've got about 10 minutes left. I would just love to open the floor. We've got about 20 participants. We'd just love to hear from others that are on the call. And so, are you considering a death cafe in your community? What brought you to the event this evening?
Let me just jump in here. I'm Ann Weston from Green Burial Project in North Carolina. And Sarah Williams, who is 2 boxes down from me tonight, and invited me to her death cafe. I had never heard of them before, but took business cards along with me about green and natural burial. Oh, that's all I say. But it
it frequently will prompt questions later in the Death Cafe from people who have never heard about green burials. People who have never heard about doulas will ask questions of a doula who happens to be sitting there when she introduces herself, and she says, I'm Nidra Clark and I'm from Hillsborough and I'm a death doula. And boom, you go down the row and, you know, there are funeral directors and a former cemetery manager. And so, you know, we've got this broad cross-section of people either directly in the funeral or death business or tangentially as oncology nurses. But then we've also got just the people who walk in off the street. But it's a good way to just sort of slide in gently about Green Burial Council, Green Burial Project, Green Burial as a concept. And I attend 3 different death cafes, and at least once a month, you know, in 1 out of the 3 death cafes, even though I've been attending them for years, there will be somebody there for whom green burial is a new concept. And so I have an opportunity offline to give them cards and send that word around. The Death Cafe moderators know me well, and if there are a number of people who have some interest in green burial, as at the beginning of Sarah's Death Cafe, when I started going there, they might ask me to, you know, open up for a little bit and just give some background on that, what it's about, why people would do it. So in order to make this link with how death cafes may support some awful these services, funeral guides, doulas, hospices, simply because the people who are attending are professionals in those networks. And we're providing not talks and promotion and that sort of thing, but just opportunities for new resources. Somebody will say, do you have a website? Yes, I've got a website and it's right here on the card, and off you go. So they are remarkable gifts to the community. Sometimes it's difficult to get somebody to go into one, but I also had an opportunity one time. I was facilitating a film showing of A Will for the Woods, and somebody in the crowd just asked me what a death cafe was. So I asked if there was anybody in the room, you know, and there were about 45 people there. I said, how many of you facilitate death cafes? And there were 3 people in the crowd who facilitated death cafes. And I said, all of the people here who have attended a death cafe, would you please stand up? And half the crowd did. So then, you know, some little questions started. This wasn't our intent, but after about 20 minutes, I said, now all of you have attended a death cafe, because what just went on here is what we do. And you have a question about, you know, is the body going to smell? Are the coyotes going to dig it up? How can I do this without an attorney? Can I transport my own dead in North Carolina? I said, all those questions come up month after month after month. And you've attended a death cafe and you know now what kinds of things you can ask. There's nothing that's off cafes. So they are tremendous gifts to the community. They are some work, but you will be rewarded, honestly. If not here, the stars in your crown in heaven.
Great, Ann. Thanks so much. I'd love to toss it to Dia. Dia, would you like to share?
Thank you. Dia in Rochester, Minnesota, and hi Sarah and others. So I've been involved with the death positive movement for maybe 10 years, but I'm a doula now, end of life doula, and I created a business called Mortality. And I did a little informal poll. Nobody really wanted to talk about death or death cafes or death they're dying. But so I created this mortality, and so I want to host a tea that that was my plan, is to be like a death cafe, only it's more of a tea, maybe at a tea shop. The first one I had, I'm in Minnesota, was in January, and we had a blizzard that day. And then I've been doing some community ed classes. And then I actually got I think it was a Facebook message from a woman in the Netherlands who had found my mortality website, and she wanted to do a death cafe, a Zoom death cafe with her group of friends and some of my friends. So yeah, Sarah, you talked about like this whole international opportunity just to talk about the wide gamut of end of life and our mortality. I'm really an advocate for having those conversations, because everybody's like, oh, I'm not going to die, wait till I'm 100. So we all know that. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there, that I might start with the death cafe or death dinner party or death salon, or it seems like there's quite a number of them. I like the Death and Donuts. The first one we had here in Rochester was called Death with Dessert. It was just cider and cookies. So it's a wide range, and eventually do a mortality. So that might be the next big thing. Thanks, Darrell.
No, not a problem. Thank you all. So it's 7:59. What I always come away from these with is that we try and provide, Green Barrel Council tries to sort of do this for the benefit of the community, and what ends up happening is Green Barrel Council is the organization that has been enriched, and so we are just on behalf of Lee and my board colleague Ann, we're just so happy that you all were able to spend some time with us, give us the opportunity to think about ways that we can be of greater service to the end-of-life profession generally, but also to the Green Barrel movement. Want to thank Gail in her absence, and Marilyn, thank you for your former board service, and thank you for agreeing to come on board and join us this evening. It was a real treat to sort of have you on board. As we usually do, this has been recorded, so I will get a copy of this to Lee. I will also follow up with all of you via Eventbrite to include some links and other things, and I will try and figure out a way to sort of get the public chat out to everyone so that they have contact information and things like that. And even if I can't, I'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of that in the follow-up from the Eventbrite. So thanks so much, everyone. Please be safe, and yeah, that's it. Have a great Wednesday evening. Bye-bye.
Ann, is your address Ann at greenburialproject.com or something like that?
greenburialproject.org.
.org. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Darrell. Great job.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much.